Good afternoon, actually good morning, and welcome to the National Press Club, the place where news happens. My name is Emily Wilkins, and I am a DC correspondent for CNBC and the 117th president of the National Press Club. Thank you all for joining us here today at the club for our headliner event with Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm. We are happy to accept your questions, and I'll ask as many as time permits. To submit a question online, please email headliners@press.org and put energy in the subject line. And for our C-SPAN and public radio audiences, please be aware that in the audience today are members of the general public, so any applause you hear is not necessarily from the working press. 3 years ago this week, Jennifer Granholm was sworn in as the 16th Secretary of Energy to lead the Biden administration's efforts to move the United States toward a clean energy transition that can achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. While there have been successes, there have also been challenges. Secretary Granholm helped the administration push policies to develop a new generation of technologies for hydrogen, batteries, fusion energy, energy storage, and grid reliability. Yet, she has faced roadblocks on building out the clean energy grid, pushback from the administration's recent LNG pause, and controversy over how the Department of Energy will handle critical mineral competition with China. A former two-term Michigan governor and a long-suffering Detroit Lions fan, I feel you on that, Secretary Granholm has also been on the front lines on the transition to electric vehicles, a major issue for the auto industry and its workforce. The EV transition has shown promise, with sales including increasing fourfold, and an improving U.S. manufacturing sector, but has still faced consumer criticism because of limits to the charging infrastructure, increased vehicle costs, and an ever-challenging supply chain for auto companies. Today, we are eager to hear more about the progress of the clean energy and manufacturing revolution as a part of the Energy Department's mission to promote a clean energy future. So please join me in a warm National Press Club welcome for Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm.
Madam President, thank you so much for that gracious and accurate introduction in terms of the challenges that we are facing. I'm delighted to be here at the National Press Club. So let me just cut to the chase and start with a number or two. 14.8 million jobs since January 2021, the greatest number of jobs ever created under any president in American history, under any term of any president in American history. 353,000 jobs just last month. The longest continuous stretch of unemployment under 4% in 50 years. More people working than at any point in American history. The strongest economic recovery of all major advanced economies. Why is this happening? It is not coincidence. It is not luck. It's the result of a focused, strategic plan. The Biden administration is using a 21st century industrial strategy to bring manufacturing back to America after years of offshoring, to lift bruised communities from their knees, and to bring future-facing good jobs to workers. It's a strategy to invest in America, all of America. So our industrial strategy for clean energy starts with a recognition of two facts. First, that clean energy represents a $23 trillion global economic opportunity, essentially a new industrial revolution as all of these countries strive to address climate change. And second, our past economic policies have failed us in many cases, tragically. From before the start of this century, so-called free trade and trickle-down economics have ushered in the losses of millions of jobs and tens of thousands of factories across the nation. Policies of administrations past effectively encouraged manufacturers to go abroad. Factories that had anchored entire communities from their moorings and had been sucked overseas. It's not an abstraction. I know this from the depth of my soul. The loss of manufacturing jobs was the most sickening, despairing part of my 8 years as governor of Michigan. A little town called Greenville, Michigan, my first year in office. A refrigerator factory owned by Electrolux was threatening to go to Mexico. Greenville was essentially a one-company town. 8,000 people lived there, almost 3,000 people working at the factory. They proudly called themselves the refrigerator capital of North America. And I remember the meeting where we made our plea to the Electrolux executives. We put every incentive we had on the table, state, local, the labor. We just wanted to keep the factory there. And the company, at the meeting, they took our list of incentives and they went outside the room for 17 minutes. And they came back in and they said, this is the most generous any community has ever been to try to keep jobs. But there is nothing you can do to compensate for the fact that we can pay $1.57 an hour in Juarez, Mexico. And so they left. And it was like a nuclear bomb went off in Little Greenville. And when the last refrigerator came off the assembly line, the workers had a gathering that they called the Last Supper. It was at Clackle's Orchard Pavilion. And I went, it was a community wake, community grieving, not just the loss of jobs, but the loss of their identity. And one father's words seared my soul. He said, Gov, I've worked at that factory for 30 years. I went from high school to factory, he said. My father worked at that factory. My grandfather worked at that factory. All I know is how to make refrigerators. So, tell me, who is ever going to hire me? Who's ever going to hire me? That question was asked by everybody at Clackle's Orchard Pavilion that day. And it's been asked by workers in every one of the 60,000 factories lost during the first part of this century. And that Greenville story happened over and over again in Michigan and across the industrial Midwest. Scores of companies moving offshore. Michigan's proud industrial base, we had such a concentration in manufacturing, meant that we were hit harder than any state in the country. No matter how many incentives a state offers, no state has the resources to compete with the industrial policies of China or the low wages in Mexico. I mean, really, is it any wonder that I and other Michigan politicians used to campaign on NAFTA and CAFTA have given us the shafta? For governors with no federal partner, honestly, it was like bringing a knife to a gunfight. But we sure tried. We, for example, incentivized a solar factory to come to Greenville. United Solar Ovonic, great fanfare. It would employ Electrolux workers. There were 3 factory buildings built on the site where the Electrolux factory previously stood. The workers were hired. And then, because of cheap solar panels from China flooding the market, United Solar Ovonic went bankrupt in 2012. And the remnants were sold to a Chinese company, and the plants shut down. Greenville hit again. Jack Welch, the iconic CEO of General Electric, famously said that he wished he could put his factories on a barge and float them to wherever costs were lowest. Manufacturing is the backbone of a nation's economy. But we just watched as other nations stepped on our weak spine and poached our IP and our jobs. And CEOs, global CEOs and economic elites, they justified the losses by invoking so-called free trade and trickle-down economics, and they glossed over the fact that other countries were not abiding by the same rules. And when I was done being governor, I actually, with a group, visited China to see how China was crafting its industrial strategy for the energy sector. And at one event where mayors of Chinese towns were showcasing their technologies and their strategies, one mayor leans over to me and he says, "So, when do you think the United States is going to get national energy policy?" And I hemmed and I hawed and I lamented Congress and gridlock, and the mayor just grinned at me and he said, "Take your time. Take your time." Because, of course, they saw our passivity as their opportunity. So, enter Joe Biden. Joe from Scranton, PA, Amtrak Joe. He felt what was happening across the country. And he tasked his cabinet with developing a policy to bring jobs and businesses back home to America. An industrial strategy for the 21st century, based in part upon clean energy, a future of manufacturing revival, thriving businesses, good jobs for our kids, energy independence, products made in America. And you know what? The president's strategy is working, folks. Did I mention 353,000 jobs last month? We now have the most significant clean energy and climate strategy in the nation's history, arguably in the world. The strategy for building clean energy, a clean energy future in the United States, rests on 4 legs. First, making the United States the irresistible nation for investing in clean energy. Second, ensuring that those investments provide economic and clean energy benefits in the communities that have been left behind. Third, strengthening America's workforce so that our workers have the skills they need to compete in this global clean energy market. And fourth, with cutting-edge R&D supporting industry so that each future generation of clean energy technology will be more innovative than the last. So, to carry out this industrial strategy, I'm so proud, and some of our team are here, that we have extensively reorganized the Department of Energy. DOE is now investing over $100 billion into clean energy demonstration and deployment through grants and loans and rebates and other public tools. We actually have 60 new programs under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. We've stood up new offices to focus on demonstration, clean energy supply chains, the electricity grid, community engagement, and more. We've hired 780 talented experts. We've recruited heavily from the private sector to serve this expanded mission. Our motto is deploy, deploy, deploy. And this restructured organization has, as of January, launched 100% of these new programs. So, as I said, the first pillar of this Biden-Harris strategy, industrial strategy, is making America irresistible for investment and growth. Answer the call. Irresistible for investment and growth. The irresistible nation. We're providing lots of carrots to incentivize businesses to invest in America again. And as we say at DOE, the clean energy revolution is government-enabled, but it's private sector-led. So we got busy with our national laboratories and input from industry. We've developed commercial liftoff reports. Vanessa Chan is here, having guided our efforts on this. And those commercial liftoff reports are outlining the roadmaps for key technologies like next-generation nuclear, like virtual power plants, carbon management, long-duration energy storage, industrial decarbonization, clean hydrogen. And then we identified the gaps in the supply chains that we needed to fill. So in the industries where there is a supply-demand mismatch that might make investors nervous. We're providing the demand signal with tools like the Defense Production Act and pay-for-difference contracts and federal procurement. If you just take clean hydrogen, for example, we developed, first of all, a technology liftoff pathway to commercialize clean hydrogen. And then we developed a clean hydrogen Earthshot, energy Earthshot. Those are big, hairy, audacious goals to bring down the cost to $1 for 1 kilogram within 1 decade. And then we announced 7 hubs, hydrogen hubs, coast to coast, to link producers and consumers and infrastructure. We are building entire ecosystems, supply chains, workforce training, supply and demand for hydrogen, financing. Our upfront public investments are going to crowd in billions of dollars of private sector dollars, laying the foundation for this thriving commodity market and help to create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs. That's just one example of the industrial strategy in one area. We're developing, and we have developed, analogous strategies with batteries, with electric vehicles, with carbon dioxide removal, with offshore wind, and so much more. And now, as we do this, we are open-eyed about it. We know we got gaps in our supply chains. China, for example, has adopted 14 5-year plans that are focused on dominating supply chains and manufacturing products that we used to excel in. China already controls so much, like critical minerals and processing for batteries, and they're producing huge volumes of low-cost solar and EVs, and they're hoping to Bigfoot the global market. And as we saw with the solar company in Greenville, they've been successful. But we are fighting back. We're being deliberate about building up these supply chains, both inside the US and with our allies. We understand that energy is a national security imperative. We cannot depend upon countries that have orchestrated monopolies on key technologies whose values we don't share. We've seen how Europe's dependence on Russia for natural gas allowed Putin to weaponize energy, and we are not going to do that. And our allies, by the way, they don't want to be captive to unfriendly nations either. So we have to create markets with trusted allies, and we are building at home. So the results of the president's approach, it's still early, but since President Biden took office, private companies have announced $650 billion in investments in semiconductors and clean energy technologies and other 21st century industries. In the energy space alone, $400 billion. And I know that's just dollars. It sounds, it's just hard to grapple that kind of amount. But what it means really is that more than 500 new or expanding manufacturing facilities in clean energy alone. And that's just less than 3 years from the passage of the president's agenda. Think about it, 500 communities that are seeing future-facing industries hiring their people. We are bringing manufacturing home. Instead of importing battery components from Nanjing, China, we're going to build anodes in Washington. We're going to build cathodes in Tennessee, separator material in Indiana, electrolytes in Texas. In a closed-down factory in Hamtramck, Michigan, we're building electric vehicles. In a formerly shuttered plant in Lordstown, Ohio, we're building EV batteries. Instead of importing solar panels from Xinjiang, we're going to manufacture our own in Georgia and Alabama and Ohio. Investments and factories and jobs are growing in every pocket of America, from Alaska to Atlanta, from the West Coast to Weirton, West Virginia. I visited Weirton a few months ago, and Weirton, West Virginia was once a thriving steel town. The steel mill used to employ 12,000 people until other nations dumped cheap steel and forced the mill into bankruptcy. and the plant closed down. And the sidewalks in Weirton rolled up, and the downtown shops closed, and so many people moved away. And then, last year, a company called Form Energy decided to start their business in Weirton, incentivized in large part by the federal tax credits. Form makes utility-scale iron air batteries, and they located their plant on the site of the old steel mill. And at a recent job fair, I think last month, hundreds of people were lined up. This living symbol of the hope that Form is bringing to Weirton. And at Form's ribbon cutting, one of the city council was there, one of the city council members, this burly, white-haired guy, bearded guy named Tim Connell, and he told me this familiar story. He said, I worked at that steel mill. My father worked at that steel mill. I thought my kids were going to work here too, but they moved away when the plant closed. But here's where the story diverges from Greenville. Now, Tim exclaimed, we have new life, like a phoenix rising from the ashes. Weirton is rising, but not so fast. So Cleveland Cliffs Steel Company long ago bought a unit of the bankrupt Weirton Steel, a tin plate factory still in Weirton. And last week, as I was thinking about these remarks, the workers at the tin plate facility were notified that they were going to be laid off too, and the factory was going to be idled, largely because of more cheap steel flooding the market from competitor nations. So this transition is not a straight line. This is a global battle. But we are on offense. And in our tool shed, trade policy is the backhoe that moves the earth as we strive to level the global playing field. And we will not relent. So as we fully deploy our tax credits and the grants and the loans to boost domestic production of these technologies, we're also working hand in hand with our colleagues at the U.S. Trade Representative's Office and Treasury and Commerce and State, and of course the White House. Let me be clear, trade and international finance and national security are a foundational part of a holistic, coherent, sustainable industrial strategy. And without getting over my skis, more is going to come on that. And done right, and it will be done right, it will be a win for U.S. companies and workers, and a win for our allies, and a win for our partners, a win for diversifying this global supply chain, and a win for urgently reducing global carbon pollution. So the thing about empowering American businesses to invest is that success builds upon success, and growth builds upon growth. But of course, injustice can also build upon injustice. So the second tenet of our industrial strategy for clean energy is to put the people and the communities who've historically been last at the forefront of this new clean energy economy. I mean, in the 20th century, I know many of you know this, as America's industrial might grew, we made choices that harmed poor Americans, that harmed tribal nations, communities of color. We built coal plants and oil refineries in the heart of poor neighborhoods, often the very communities that were powering our country's prosperity. And it was those families that bore the brunt of the resulting pollution. I recently visited Louisiana's river parishes along the Mississippi River, an area known as Cancer Alley. And refineries and chemical plants have sprouted up over the back fences of poor citizens, causing folks to breathe in cancer-causing particulates. Everybody there, it seems, is related to somebody who died of cancer. Mr. Robert Taylor, who's a gentle 83-year-old resident, showed me his family's graveyard, where a refinery has literally sprouted up and surrounded and confined the small cemetery, which is so hemmed in now that graves are stacked neatly on top of one another, loved ones on top of loved ones. And Mr. Taylor is trying to decide whether his grave will be stacked on top of his father's or his grandfather's. The president's Investing in America agenda flips the script on this history of energy injustice. President Biden has announced the most ambitious climate and clean energy and environmental justice agenda ever taken. From day one, he's directed us to leave no one behind in this energy transition, from communities like the river parishes to the coal and steel and power plant communities who drove the first industrial revolution and who will be central to the next one. It is the president's core belief that every person deserves so basic, to breathe clean air, to drink clean water, to live in a healthy community, right? And a critical part of that work is the Justice 40 initiative, which sets this goal that 40% of the overall benefits of these investments will flow to disadvantaged communities. Our laws, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, they offer extra incentives to locate clean energy projects in disadvantaged communities. For example, if there's a solar developer who wants to build a community solar project, they get 5 times the base credit amount if they meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. And they get an additional 10% tax credit for locating it in an energy community. And if they meet domestic content standards, they can get another 10%, all stackable. And if they do all of those things, that tax credit is worth 50% the cost of their investment. A 50% tax credit to build promising new projects if they do it in a way that helps those whom the economy of yesterday left behind. That is irresistible. And further, companies that want DOE loans, so those were tax incentives, right? So if you want loans or grants in your competition to achieve those from DOE, from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, they have to explain, the companies have to explain how they will ensure that the project directly benefits the communities that they'll be based in through a community benefits plan. They've got to demonstrate how they're going to create quality jobs and opportunities for local workers and generate equitable benefits for residents, including reducing energy costs and reducing exposure to pollution. We score the competitive applications based upon the strength of these plans, and we're holding companies accountable to them. So the president's strategy prioritizes this, not just because it is the right thing to do, but because it's the only way to make sure that this clean energy transition will succeed. Because when people are part of deciding their future, the path for siting and permitting and growing these projects will result in fewer lawsuits and less friction and more certainty and better results. And here again, it's working, incentivizing investment in these communities. Recent studies have shown that because of this prong of the industrial strategy, challenged communities under the Biden administration are receiving 2x the investments relative to their population as compared to other regions. It's working. Now, maybe you've heard that the president is a pro-labor guy. There is nothing more important to him than creating a middle class through investing in skilled workers. He's grateful to the labor movement for creating the middle class in America. You may have heard that the president's strategy is to really build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out, and labor is an important part of that. And that's why the third part of this holistic strategy is focusing on the workforce that'll build pioneering clean energy technologies and ensuring workers make fair wages that they can raise a family on. Workers are not incidental to President Biden's Investing in America agenda. They are central to it. And for the clean energy transition to endure, we have to plan to have the right mix of skills available today and in 5 years and 10 years and 20 years. And it's why our strategy prioritizes above average pay and benefits For example, we see prevailing wages under the Davis-Bacon Act as a floor, not a ceiling. We also prioritize apprenticeships, pathways to unionization to create jobs that people will want to grow in, where communities can have a shot at keeping their young people at home, where the sidewalks don't roll up. In visiting towns with industrial losses, which I have seen a lot of, you might guess, what are people's deepest fears? Their deepest fear is that their kids are going to be forced to move away to find a job, and that the community will be hollowed out, and it will hollow out their family. In Schenectady, New York, the administration's incentives are supporting a manufacturing line for wind turbine components. And one handler, Eric Romero Sr., described how proud he was, after years of offshoring and layoffs, to have his son join him on the manufacturing line. And his son, Eric Romero Jr., said the clean energy investments in his community have created opportunities for young people like me that we never thought would come our way. And Eric's father said, "It gives me hope." Hope. I know, hope is not a strategy. So, the fourth tenet, we can't just think about the present. We have to be planning the future. We are Americans, as the president would say. We're great at this, which is why, we landed first on the moon. We invented the iPhone. We lead the world in path-breaking R&D through our 17 national laboratories. So today, thanks to the president's strategy, we're making R&D more purposeful by infusing it with the insight of businesses that are bringing clean energy technologies to market. For example, I referred to this, the department's energy earthshots. They challenge our scientists and industry to lower the costs by 80 to 90% of 8 pivotal technologies, like floating offshore wind platforms, enhanced geothermal, my personal favorite, long duration batteries that store renewable energy. And importantly, in addition to that, we're doing so much in R&D, but we are working to end the practice of invent it here, make it there. If you're using taxpayer money to develop a technology, you'll be expected to manufacture it right here in America. Our strategy looks with clear eyes into the future, but it is rooted in the proudest moments of our past. 80 years ago, as World War II tore Europe apart, our country used the might of American industry to tackle the struggle between democracy and fascism. And long after the Allies won the war, the investments that we made in our industries and in our workers helped to power a 20th century manufacturing juggernaut. But along the way, we lost our way. We lost our mojo. We lost the manufacturing that was our economy's spine. And today, we are changing that. And we're doing what America has always done, which is capitalizing on this opportunity to lead the world. The U.S. is back, baby. We are the envy of the world. I just came back from an international gathering of energy ministers, and every country there is tracking what we are doing. Every minister I spoke to wanted to emulate our aggressiveness in their own way. Our success at home is giving a jolt to clean energy investment around the world. Policy works. Who knew? So don't underestimate Joe Biden, folks. The man with a plan. And thanks to that plan, America has begun one of the most significant economic transformations we'll see in our lifetimes. This shift toward a future powered by clean energy, with advanced products stamped, made in America, built and installed by American workers in proud American communities. A transformation in which innovation is inevitable, investment in America is irresistible, and no American feels invisible. This is our America. It's our time to soar. God, I love this country, don't you? Thanks.
All right. Yeah. Well, after that delivery, I understand why they made you the Secretary of Energy. This makes sense now. So one thing that you really touched on there was the relationship between the federal government and states manufacturing and what Biden is doing. So I actually wanted to start off with a question from my colleague at CNBC, Pippa Stevens, who notes that there was a lot of promise around clean energy when Biden was elected and the Inflation Reduction Act was passed. The expansion of tax credits was huge. But there have been some major stalling in these projects. Now, she says the primary reason is higher rates, but there's also a ton of red tape around permitting for infrastructure. What can the Department of Energy do to help speed up that process and help some of these companies get there faster?
Yeah. No, this is, we, as I often say inside the department, we have to do everything everywhere all at once. And that includes, of course, addressing a lot of the underbrush that creates the friction to get from getting these projects going. So on permitting, we support permitting reform, but we're not waiting for Congress to act. We are doing what we can inside of on our federal lands, for example. We have a whole process now called SITAP. I won't get into it, but the bottom line is it has a 2-year shot clock on getting all permits done for clean energy on federal lands and for transmission in particular, because that is super important. We're actually looking at ways that advanced technology can help on permitting. So for example, could AI be a solution to accelerate the permitting process because of all the data we have on land, et cetera? We might be able to, we are looking at how we can take advantage of that. But there's no doubt we need to continue to work on accelerating permitting both in the congressional line of fire, but also inside of the administration, and there's a whole work group that is doing that. It's one of the reasons why you've seen a lot of these transmission lines actually come to fruition now, because we've got a whole work group that is working on pulling down the barriers to making sure that we can cut the ribbon.
I know there are also a lot of folks in this room and who are joining us who have many questions about the LNG and the pause on certain exports of it. Obviously, that announcement really set off a firestorm, I think, both in the U.S. and around the world, including from trading partners that have signed contracts with the U.S. or are looking to do business with the U.S. in the future. And I think the main question on everyone's mind is you've gone on TV, said that this should last only a couple months. Can you give us a clear time frame here? Can we expect something this spring, this summer, this fall? When can we expect this pause to end?
Yeah, I'm not going to put a time frame on it. We're working as fast as we can. It is going to take a lot of information, and let me just give you an example. So we do these reviews periodically. The last one was in 2018 and 2019. At the time of that review, we were only exporting 4 BCF, billion cubic feet of LNG. We are now exporting 14 billion, and we have another 12 billion under construction, and there's another 22 billion that have been authorized. So that 48 billion worth of LNG that's been authorized, that's still happening. But at some point, don't you say, well, what does this do to prices at home if we're exporting all of this natural gas? And of course, our manufacturing sector relies upon natural gas for power, et cetera, as well as commercial and residential. Is there an impact on price? Should we be taking into account all of these countries that have pledged to reduce their dependence on fossil fuels and what their outcome is? Will there be a building out of stranded assets, as we say, if we permit future ones? All of the ones that have been authorized, those are all not touched by this pause. And it is just a pause to do the study that we are required to do to see whether it's in the public interest for new projects. So our national labs are doing this as a modeling study. They have to take into account a whole array of inputs, but Like with all modeling studies, it takes a little bit of time, but we're working as fast as we can.
I mean, you mentioned the 2019 and kind of going back, doing the analysis. I know that there were several studies that were commissioned by the Energy Department in 2018, 2019, that show that LNG exports to Asia and Europe produce less greenhouse emissions than coal produced and consumed in those areas. But environmentalists have come out and said that those studies are outdated. And I wanted to see if you agree, and I want to see if part of this analysis is looking at this.
Yeah, no, it totally is. I mean, this is building on, we've done this analysis periodically since like 2012. And so this built on previous analyses. But the fact that the volumes of export now are just overwhelmingly greater than what it was when the last analysis was done requires, just take a few months to pause to make sure we're doing this right. And yeah, the question about, and this is, a lot of folks have raised this issue of what is the life cycle greenhouse gas emission as a result of exporting LNG. LNG emissions, or natural gas emissions just on their own, of course, are less than coal. But the question has been raised, when you liquefy, when you transport, et cetera, when you combine, what is the actual impact over the process of all of it? And some studies have suggested that's even more greenhouse gas emitting than coal. But I'm not saying one way or the other. This is why we got to have the labs who are objective. I have to say, in God we trust, all others bring data. We just need the data to determine whether what is happening on the ground in order to make an informed decision that is in the public interest, which is what the Natural Gas Act requires us to do.
And I know you've said that this isn't going to be impacting, at least in the short term, our relationships with our allies, that the contracts are going to still be fulfilled. And there have been others who have kind of reaffirmed and backed that up. But there are 17 planned projects that are now going to be delayed. And it looks like we're going to be needing our allies in Europe and Asia for quite some time. And I'm wondering kind of what is your message when it comes to the longer term impacts that a several month pause could have?
There will not be, as I say, there are 12 billion cubic feet that are currently under construction, and that won't even be up until before 2030, maybe 2028. This months long pause does not affect any long-term. And when you say 17 projects, I think it's 12. 12 projects that had applied for authorization. Those 12, we just said, let's hold on the 12 that have not been authorized already, even though all these others have been authorized. And before we take another jump, let's just make sure we're doing this in the right way.
But even though that those 12 are now going to take longer, you don't think that's going to have any sort of impact on our production or the amount we're able to export?
Absolutely not, given how much we have already authorized. And that, 22 billion cubic feet are authorized and haven't even begun construction yet. I don't know if all of those will be built, but nonetheless, we have just authorized so much that our allies, and believe me, we wouldn't be taking any, first of all, there's an exception in the pause that if there's a national security reason, we can authorize further. But the bottom line is this is not going to impact any relationship that we have with our allies or their ability to access energy. We would not be doing it if it did.
What would you say to those out there, though, who maybe they don't have the relationship right now with the U.S., they're looking to get potential LNG exports in the future, and they're looking at this pause and they're saying, what does this mean for the future? What does this mean for precedent?
It's only a months-long pause. It's not a ban.
But it's uncertainty, right?
Well, for a few months they'll wait to see, perhaps, before they apply, but they have to get all of their act together too. This is not going to affect relationships with any of our allies, and it should not cause great uncertainty. We just are doing what we are required to do under the statute. I fear that I totally understand the concern making sure that we're able to supply our allies, and we have crafted this in a way that we will make sure that energy continues to flow. We are the largest exporter of natural gas in the world, and we will continue to be the largest exporter in the world.
I know that the New York Times, they reported that the White House has directed the Energy Department to expand its evaluation of LNG projects to consider the impact of climate change. Now, my understanding is, from what I've read, the Energy Department has never rejected a proposed natural gas project because of its expected environmental impact. I'm wondering if you see that changing in the future.
Yeah, we have to evaluate what is in the public interest. And obviously, climate is part of what would be considered in the public interest. The impacts on communities, like I was talking about the river parishes, you know, what does it mean for that public to have additional LNG supplying that? Those are all questions, and those are all things, again, that the labs and the objective modelers will evaluate.
And we do have another audience question on this topic again. Huge interest here.
Yeah.
And I think this kind of speaks to what I was trying to get at a bit with the uncertainty. But how do you answer criticism that the LNG permit pause could morph into a cap or even a ban in a potential second Biden term?
Well, you know, I am not projecting forward what the objective modelers and scientists will tell us. I mean, we'll let them do their work. We want to continue, we will continue to use and supply the world with LNG. So that is not even a question. You know,
That a ban's not a question?
There's not going to be a ban on LNG because we have already authorized 48 billion cubic feet of export capacity. So there will not be a ban on LNG.
Mm-hmm. So no ban, no cap. Both
well,
of those things
I'm
are
just
off
saying
the table.
that the word ban suggests that we're going to stop LNG exports. That is just not going to happen. Those contracts are in existence. The authorizations that previously occurred are going to stay in place, and we'll take a look at what the global demand is, and we'll take a look at what the supply is, and what other nations are doing to bring on their supply, and what it does for costs back at home, and that's an important factor too.
I know you also talked a lot about Chinese products, the impact that it's had on the market. We have a question from Jael Holtzman at Axios. She said that last year you decided not to award a $200 million grant to battery company Microvast after lawmakers raised concerns about the company's links to the Chinese Communist Party. And what is your line in the sand about when companies with ties to China disqualify them from getting federal dollars?
Yeah, we've set up, as part of our restructuring, we have set up a whole system for evaluating those who are applying for U.S. taxpayer grants, right? And if a country is controlled by a foreign entity of concern, like China, we are not going to go forward with a grant in that way. So our system, it includes a process that's similar to CFIUS, where we evaluate what the risks are, et cetera. But we want to be clear that we want to develop our intellectual property here. We want to keep our intellectual property here. We want to manufacture it here. We want to manufacture it with American businesses and American workers.
You did also mention when you were up at the podium, and I know that this is a bit of a concern, is that you have all of these Chinese products, many of them that are cheaper to the consumer, that are coming in and kind of flooding the market and making it very difficult for the U.S. To really get their products out to consumers. What is your thought on how this really needs to be addressed? And are some of these American companies going to have to be bailed out to a certain extent?
Well, I don't know about bailing out, but I do know that the president's strategy, this is why this whole industrial strategy is so important, that being able to put tax credits on incentives to invest in America is an important part of leveling the playing field. And so carrots in that way, bringing those investments here, and especially helping governors to compete in keeping investments here is undergirds all of that. Co-investing to ensure that we've got key manufacturing capability in this nation. So that's what the Inflation Reduction Act is all about. It's what the bipartisan infrastructure law is all about. And it's what the thought behind our trade policy is all about. And as I say, that there's more to come on that, but the bottom line is it is a holistic strategy to make America irresistible, and it is working.
As a journalist, I can't help myself. Can you say a little bit more? I know you said there's more to come. Any sense of timing or sort of specific, what we might be able to expect?
I appreciate the effort, but no.
I had to try.
Yes.
Democrats have historically opposed new mining initiatives due to some of the potential environmental harms, pollution, land degradation. Can we solve the rare mineral supply issues that the U.S. is facing without tapping into our own mineral reserves?
Well, we support updating the mining law, which is 150 years old. We can do sustainable extraction, and we also have allies that are doing that very thing, like Canada, Australia. We also have a whole strategy around recycling, sort of a circular economy. If you can take the battery that's in your iPad and extract the lithium and the other critical minerals from it and put it to use in an electric vehicle battery, that is a component of the stuff that we are funding. We're also funding sustainable extraction. Whether we know that we need lithium, we need cobalt, we need graphite, we need a whole array of critical minerals in order to make sure that this clean energy economy works. And so that full supply chain is part of what our Loan Programs Office is working on investing in. It's part of what our Grants and Manufacturing Supply Chain Office is working on investing in, and it's part of what we're doing on the international front in friendshoring and developing stronger relationships with countries that share our values and that we can create a buyer's and a seller's market with.
I know there's also, of course, a lot of discussion right now among electric vehicles, and there's certainly been a lot that your department has done to try to incentivize the production and the promotion of electric vehicles. But I want to kind of ask a little bit about what seems to be an imbalance right now, that there are a lot of companies that are coming to the US hoping to build electric vehicles to get some of these incentives. But at the same point, for consumers, it's still a little bit difficult for them to find models that meet all of the requirements for the. What is your thought on that? Is this something that's just going to even out over time, or does there need to be some retooling?
It's a great point. I mean, obviously, we want to incentivize the domestic production, and we want to make sure people have access to these tax credits. And so the strategy is to get manufacturing back in the U.S. And so incentivizing those tax credits, the OEMs, the automakers, they want their customers to qualify for those tax credits. Well, if they do, they're bringing their production back on shore to be able to enable customers to get $7,500 off the hood at a dealer when they buy an electric vehicle. So it is, we're seeing a whole bunch of new models coming online, a whole bunch more manufacturing happening, and I think the unevenness of this whole push will even out over time. But the bottom line is, it really is the amount of investment and of work that's being done on EVs and batteries across the country is just so amazing.
And I know there's a lot being done on charging stations as well, which I know is kind of a big factor for a lot of consumers when they look at getting an electric vehicle.
They want the charging stations made in America too.
You also want them to be available when you're on the highway and you realize you don't. I mean, you drive an electric vehicle. Yes. Have you had moments where you've been low on power or had to scramble for a charging station?
Absolutely, and this is why, again, the president's, the bipartisan infrastructure law, $7.5 billion to be able to fill in the pockets where you can't charge. So we have a joint office between the Department of Energy and the Department of Transportation. All of the states now have their plans approved and their money in hand, and you're starting to see them break ground on adding charging stations in states. And the charging stations, the first tranche of money went to the transportation corridors, so that you have to have a charging station like on the freeway, et cetera, on a highway, every 50 miles, not more than a mile off the freeway. It has to be app enabled, so you'll start to see those so that it fills in the gaps where the private sector won't go because the demand isn't so high, right? And then the second tranche was for areas like in urban areas or rural areas where, again, the private sector wasn't going, but we want to make sure we've got enough charging in place. So all of that is happening right now, but yeah, clearly we need more. We have about 170,000 charging stations across the country. Now the president's goal is to get to 500,000. We're going to get there by 2026.
I also got an audience question on the SPR, and I just wanted to see if you could elaborate on the innovation of SPR's fixed price contracts and the potential opportunities to expand on the authority to advance the country's energy security.
Yeah, the SPR is a tremendous tool. We have the largest
strategic petroleum
reserve of any nation on Earth. And it's there to ensure that there is enough in case there's an emergency. Like, for example, we released millions of barrels when Russia invaded Ukraine, And then Russian oil, there were sanctions. Russian oil was not flowing in the market, and there was a huge supply crunch. So we, along with a number of other countries, released from their strategic petroleum reserves. Now we're in the process of replenishing that, and so we're buying millions of barrels every month now. We have another solicitation every month or two, and so we're starting to see that replenishment. So we want to make sure we've got both enough supply for emergencies, and we want to make sure that it is we're not doing anything that will take away supply from the market at a time when prices might be high. Although I will note that prices have dropped significantly since the invasion of Ukraine by over $1.50 a gallon.
I know that you also, and sorry to jump around so much, but
all right.
we got a lot to cover
what we're
today.
Here for.
You also mentioned a bit of the hydrogen hubs as a critically important the proliferation of hydrogen production and hydrogen use. But they're also tied to the Buy American, the incentivizing union jobs. So how will those promised union jobs be impacted if the Treasury Department's guidelines on hydrogen production tax credits are too restrictive?
Well, those, obviously, we're waiting for the final guidance from the Treasury Department, and there has been proposed guidance put out, and we are asking sincerely for input so that when the final guidance comes out, we've taken into account the concerns of industry, of stakeholders, et cetera. We're feeling really excited about the interest, for example, on the side of the private sector. I see David Crane is here. He's head of he is in charge of our infrastructure column within the Department of Energy and has been visiting, I know, folks who are investors in the East Coast, New York, and Houston, and there's a great amount of excitement. We've also done a couple of things that are different, which is, since this is a new market, we have stood up a demand-side strategy. So who's going to offtake hydrogen, clean hydrogen, right? How do you make that happen? How do you make sure that it is not super expensive? And so we have deployed something akin to a contract for difference where we will be guaranteeing a certain price for the hydrogen so that the hub itself can guarantee offtake as well as input. And the hubs, they've got all sorts of businesses that are dappled in there, whether it's electrolyzers to be able to make the clean hydrogen, or steam methane reformers and carbon capture efforts, and what is the pipeline infrastructure? What is there fuel cells component for transportation and heavy-duty trucking? All of these components of a hydrogen hub are a piece of it. So we're getting, obviously this is hugely competitive. It is crowding in billions of dollars of private sector money because people see hydrogen as a huge opportunity for industrial decarbonization as well. And so we're very, bullish that this is going to happen.
We also did have another audience question going back to the Inflation Reduction Act and the tax credits there. They want to know what your response is to concerns that carrot-based policies like the infrastructure law and the IRA exclude other countries who lack the U.S.'s economic might from being able to compete and partake in the clean energy economy.
Well, I have had a lot of conversations with energy ministers, my counterparts, who have said, you know what? Thank you guys for doing this because it will spur our governments to be able to do the same. And we say, great, there is enough to go around. As I said, this is a $23 trillion global economic opportunity, and the demand by 195 countries who have stepped up to the Paris Accords and said they want to reduce their carbon emissions and get to net zero by 2050 means all of these products have to be built in a lot of countries. And the energy components of it, the generation components of it can happen everywhere. So we think that we are inspiring other countries to do similarly aggressive steps. And we have heard that from them, and we're excited about it. There is enough to go around.
We have I love this. It's such a technical question. Are you still on track to announce selections for the $63 billion industrial decarbonization FOA in Q1?
Yes.
All right. Short and sweet. Well, we do have one final question, but before I get to that, Secretary, I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for being here and to thank the organizers of today's event.
Likewise,
Headliners,
thank you.
No, headliners, co-team leaders, Dinah Lanwine-Leger and Lori Russo. Today's headliners event, an organizer, fellow Michigan native Frank Maisano, and club events coordinator Cecily Scott Martin. Thanks to all of you who participated in our discussion, all of you who sent questions. I also do have to take a minute while you're all sitting here, remind you of a couple quick upcoming events. On Tuesday, March 5th, join us to hear teen entrepreneurs Fenley Surlock and Jason Leo discuss their new book, Down to Business, 51 Leaders Share Practical Advice on How to Become a Young Entrepreneur. I am told that this is also applicable to 33-year-old entrepreneurs and much older entrepreneurs if you're interested. And on March 13th, we'll hear from Diane Foley, the mother of Jim Foley, a freelance journalist who was captured and killed by ISIS in 2014, about her new book, American Mother. I sincerely hope that you can join us for those. And Secretary Granholm, as is custom for the National Press Club, I want to give you our National Press Club mug. May you drink much coffee and many Michigan pops from it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So
well, we have
much.
one last question.
Oh,
so,
okay.
All right, but we do try and have a bit of a fun one for the last one. So you had a bit of a brush with journalism in your early career. You were a customer service representative for the Los Angeles Times. What insights can you give us into customer complaints?
Okay, they're really pissed off if they don't get the paper on their porch by 7 a.m. That's the most important. But yeah, LA Times, back in the day.
Back in the day.
All right.
Secretary, thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
joining
much.
us today.
Appreciate
Really
it.
appreciate
All right.
it. Thank you.